ICs. We will begin with the small ICs. As you can see here, we have U63 and U62. We're gonna desolder these ICs. I will show you how to desolder these ICs. This is just a small ICs. Of course, we're gonna desolder medium ICs and other big ICs, but first let's desolder these ICs. So let's get started. Of course, as you can see, we're gonna use just the hot air gun with the tweezer. Now the first IC is removed easily without any difficulties. Okay, so let's put the IC and then continue desoldering the second IC. Okay, always you should check using the tweezer. Now the IC is removed. Good, easily. Now I show you the easy way to remove these ICs. If you adjust your hot air station, you can remove any IC you want. So as you can see here, so always, as I told you before, you should pay attention to the first pin. Always the first pin is marked with the dot or the point in the IC and the white mark in the PCB. Okay, and now let's align the ICs in their places. Okay, always you should first align the IC. Of course, you can use the soldering paste if you want to fix the ICs. So as you can see, now we solder the ICs using always the hot air station or the hot air gun. Okay, you can move, of course, the hot air gun in order to avoid the overheat. Okay, now the ICs are connected, as you can see, successfully. Okay, now the ICs are good. As you can see, the ICs are in their places. Okay, as you can see. So let's desolder another IC. This is also another IC with more pins, as you can see. So this is the charge IC, as you can see. So this is the charge IC for this motherboards, as you can see. White mark means the pin number 1. Okay, so this is the charge IC circuit. As you can see, we have here, as you can see, the component of charge IC circuit. This is the current sense resistor. As you can see, this white component here, this is a connector, the input power connector. Okay, this is another current sense resistors. So let's begin our operation of desoldering this IC. So we will desolder this IC using the same working principle. Okay, you can just check using the tweezer and you can move the hot air gun, as you can see, in order to avoid the overheat in the body of the IC. Now the IC is removed, as you can see. Okay, easily. This is the place of the IC in the PCB. Okay, this is a dual IC because the pins is in both sides. Now let's solder the IC again back. So the first step is to align it. Okay, always you should align the IC and pay attention to the first pin always. Okay, so let's align it carefully. Okay. And of course, you should always pay attention to the small components around the IC when you want to remove it or to solder it. Okay, because if you don't pay attention, you can damage or move the components around the ICs, like ceramic capacitors and small resistors. So always you should pay attention. As you can see here, we have the soldering paste. Of course, you can use the soldering paste. If you want, you can use the soldering paste. You can just apply a small amount of soldering paste in the body of the IC. So the soldering paste makes the soldering operation easier. Okay, so you can use it, and also it protects the body of the IC. Okay, so you can use the soldering paste, or you can easily use the hot air gun without soldering paste, no problem. Okay, but for the big ICs you have to use the soldering paste. Okay, to facilitate the desoldering and soldering operations. Okay, now the IC, as you can see, is connected easily. Okay, so now we're gonna desolder another IC, as you can see, with the pins in the 4 sides, as you can see. So I will show you how to desolder this kind of ICs. Okay, because there is many types of ICs, but for this IC you should pay attention for these capacitors, because the capacitors are sensitive to the temperature. Okay, so pay attention always when you want to desolder or solder a component next to capacitors. You should pay attention. Do not apply directly the heat to the capacitors. So now let's apply a small amount of the flux and then try to desolder this IC, as you can see. Of course, using 2 tools, the hot air gun and the tweezer. So as you can see, the IC is desoldered easily. Okay, so always pay attention to the component around the IC. As you can see, we remove the IC easily. Okay, so this is the IC that we have removed, as you can see. And of course, you should always pay attention to the first pin. This is a very important tip. Always pay attention to the first pin, because if you install or you solder the IC wrongly, you can damage other components next to it, or even you can damage the super IO for the charge IC. That's why you should always pay attention to the first pin. You should always pay attention to the point or to the dot in the body of the IC should be next to the white mark or to the white point in the PCB. Okay, so now let's align the IC. As you can see, we're gonna align the IC to its place in the PCB. Should take your time to align any component to the PCB, because if you don't align it to its place, you can make a short circuit. Okay, you can make a short circuit and then damage the motherboard or the other circuits in the motherboard. Now, as you can see, the IC is aligned correctly, as you can see. Okay, always the ICs with 4 sides of pins require more attention, okay, to align it correctly. So now let's solder the IC. As you can see, you can encircle the hot air gun in order to avoid the overheat in the body of the IC. Okay, now the IC is soldered. Okay, as you can see. So let's check it using the tweezer. As you can see, good, the IC is soldered. Now we go in to desolder another IC. In this time, this is a bigger IC than the ICs that we have already desoldered. As you can see, this is the first pin. Here we have the dot and the white mark or the white dot. So now let's get started and desolder this IC. Of course, this is another IC with 4 sides pins. Okay, of course, with the same working principle, you can use the soldering paste, okay, to facilitate this soldering operation. As you can see, you can just apply a small amount of soldering paste in the body of the IC, okay, and then go ahead and desolder it. Okay, so as you can see in this course, I'm going to show you how to desolder mini ICs and mini components in order to master the desoldering and soldering process. Okay, so now as you can see, the IC is removed easily. As you can see, even if this IC is bigger than the others that we have seen before, but the process is the same. Okay, the process is the same. And as I told you before, you can just adjust the hot air gun station to 350 in temperature. Now as you can see, here we have the IC, as you can see. So this is the body of the IC, as you can see. So now let's solder it back. Okay, focus always. You should pay attention to the first pin. Now let's align the IC. Always you should pay attention to the first pin. Okay, the dot or the point in the body of the IC should be next to the white mark or to the white dot or to the white line in the PCB. So now let's align the IC in order to avoid the short circuit. Okay, so if you don't align the IC correctly, you can make a short circuit in the motherboard, because if you don't align it, you can make a short circuit between 2 pins. Now as you can see, the IC is aligned correctly, as you can see here, and the point here we have the pin number 1. Okay, so good. So now let's use the hot air gun to solder the IC. Now the IC is connected successfully. So now, as you can see, let's apply a little amount of soldering paste in this IC. This is the audio controller IC. Okay, so now let's desolder this IC. As you can see, we're gonna use always the heat gun with the tweezer. As you can see, now the IC is removed. The smoke, as you can see, is just the smoke of the soldering paste. This is the point here, and here we have this mark, means the pin number 1. Okay, so now let's solder again the IC, but first let's apply a little bit of the soldering paste in order to make the IC fixed in each place. Okay, so we can just apply a little bit. Okay, as you can see, then let's align the IC. Always we should pay attention to the pin number 1. Always do a hole or the point in the IC over the IC should be next to the first pin in the motherboard that is determined with the white mark. Okay, now the IC is aligned. As you can see, the IC now is aligned in its place. As you can see, you have the point is next this dot, white dot, means the IC is aligned correctly. As I told you before, if you don't align the IC in its place, or if you don't place the IC correctly, you can create a short circuit in the motherboard. So now let's solder the IC. As you can see, always try to move the hot air gun in a circular movement in order to avoid damaging the IC. So now we're gonna desolder this big IC. This is the super IO or the super input output IC. So let's desolder this IC. As you see, this is a big IC that contains about 64 pins. Okay, so let's apply a little bit of the soldering paste over its pins. Okay, as I told you before, the soldering paste has many advantages. The first characteristic of soldering paste is the protection of the IC. Okay, now let's desolder the IC. Okay, so let's desolder the IC by moving the hot air gun in a circular movement. And as you can see, I will use this tweezer that I made from a wire, an electric wire, because I can adjust the width of this tweezer. Now the IC is removed successfully. Okay, always avoid to take the IC from its pins. Never touch the pins of the IC, never, because if you touch its pins, you can bend it or broken it. Always take the IC from edges. Okay, avoid to touch the pins of the IC. Okay, so as you can see, the IC is, all IC pins are good. Here we have the first pin, the dot. Here we have the white mark. Okay, so now let's put back the IC and solder it to the motherboard. But first we should align it correctly. And as I told you before, always take your time and align the IC. Okay, always take your time, because if you don't align it correctly, it can be damaged. You can create a short circuit, then you can damage other circuit in the motherboard. So now let's solder the IC. As you can see, always, as I told you before, you can adjust your hot air station. Just put in the temperature 350 and adjust the air in accordance with the component you want to remove. Now the IC, as you can see, is connected. Okay, as you can see. Now we're gonna remove another IC. As you can see, this is a very big IC, as you can see. So let's apply with the same working principle a little bit of soldering paste in the IC pins. As you can see, this is the soldering paste. As you can see, advanced quality, join, high intensity. As you can see, good immersion, neutral, no Poisson or erosions, good insulation, smooth welding surface, no deterioration, no dry, and many others characteristics. So as I told you, this is a very big IC, so this tweezer, I cannot use this tweezer because the length of this tweezer is not enough. That's why I made this tweezer, okay, from an electrical wire. Okay, this tweezer I can adjust its length, okay, because this is a big IC. I can use this tweezer that I made from an electrical wire. So now let's begin the desoldering operation. Always desolder the IC by moving the hot air gun in a circular movement, as you can see. Because if you apply the heat in just one point on the IC, you can burn it or damage it. Okay, so avoid to apply the heat in just one point. Okay, now let's check. The IC is still connected to the motherboard, so let's continue applying the heat. Okay, finally, as you can see, we removed the IC. So this smoke, the smoke is just the burned soldering paste. Okay, this is the soldering paste that is burned. Okay, this smoke is not that the IC is burned. No, just the soldering paste are burned. The soldering paste is burned. Okay, so as you can see, this is the IC to contain more than 100 pins. Now let's solder it back. Okay, the same working principle. After aligning it to the motherboard, you can apply the heat in a circular movement in order to solder it correctly. Okay. So as you can see, we apply now the hot air. Now the IC, as you can see, is connected. So now this is the BIOS IC. This is the first pin. As you can see, we have this dot. So this is the BIOS IC that contains the pins in both sides. So we're gonna desolder and solder this IC. Normally, the BIOS that is used in many motherboards is the BIOS with 8 pins, but also in some motherboards you can find this kind of BIOS. This is the BIOS chip, okay, that contains the program. So now, as you can see, let's apply the hot air to this BIOS IC. So let's check using the tweezer if the IC is ready to be removed. Now the IC is removed, as you can see. As I told to you, always avoid to touch the IC in its pins, because if you touch its pins, you can break the pins or damage it. So always avoid to touch the ICs in its pins. Okay. So now, after aligning the IC, we can solder it back to the motherboard. Okay. So as you can see here, this is the BIOS IC. So we're gonna desolder this BIOS IC. This BIOS, as you can see, contains the pins in all sides, as you can see. Okay. So let's apply a little soldering paste over the body of the BIOS. As you know, the soldering paste can protect the BIOS from the overheat, okay, or the IC in general, and also it makes the desoldering operation easier. Okay, so as you see, let's apply a little bit of the soldering paste around the BIOS, and let's use our hot air station gun in order to desolder the BIOS. So as you can see, always try to move the gun, the soldering heat gun, in the circle. Okay, as you can see here, move it around the IC in order to make the heat in all sides of the IC. So let's check using the tweezer. So let's continue applying the heat. Now let's try. As you can see now, the BIOS IC is removed easily without any problem, as you can see. Okay, so this is the place of the BIOS, as you can see. IC, so this is normally a big IC. It contains the pins in 4 sides, as you can see. So of course this is an old BIOS, but the used BIOS now in usually in the laptop motherboard is the BIOS IC with 8 pins. So now let's align the BIOS in each place. Okay, always take your time to align the ICs in order to avoid the short circuit. Okay, always take your time until you align the IC 100%. Okay, because if you don't align it, you can make a short circuit. So now let's apply the heat to the IC. Okay, always, as you can see, in a circle, move the gun in a circle, as you can see. Okay, never apply the heat in just one point in order to avoid to damage the ICs. Now, as you can see, the IC is connected, as you can see. Okay, now let's see another IC. This is another IC, as you can see. So normally this is an frequency IC. So you will find this kind of IC in every laptop motherboard and also computer motherboard. So this IC always is near to the CPU, as you can see. This IC is responsible for generating the clocks or the frequency for the whole circuits in the motherboard. So after applying a little bit of soldering paste, let's now desoldering the IC, as you can see. So let's check. Easy. So the IC is desoldered successfully. Okay, without any issues, as you can see. And as you can see, I used this kind of tweezer that I made from an electrical wire, okay, for the big ICs, okay. And I used the normal tweezer for just MOSFETs and small ICs. As you can see, this is the place of the IC, as you can see. Clean place, or pins, slots are correct. As you can see, always pay attention to the pin number 1, always the point or the dot of the IC should be aligned with the first pin that is marked with a white, as you can see, color or a white mark. Now let's align the IC, okay? Always using the same working principle, okay? Always after aligning the IC, okay? Take your time, always take your time to align the IC. So the most important step in the motherboard repairing, when you want to desolder or where you want to solder an IC, you should take your time until you align correctly the IC, okay? So as you can see here, the IC is aligned, as you can see, very easy, okay? The IC is aligned 100%. Now we can apply the heat over the IC, as you can see, in a circle movement, okay? Do not apply the heat in just one point, because if you do so, you can damage the IC, okay? Now the IC is soldered to the motherboard, okay? So let's check. As you can see, okay, the IC is soldered. Good. So as you can see, the IC is soldered correctly. Okay, all pins are connected to the motherboard. Okay, as you can see, and the components, as you can see around the IC, are good. No problem in the component around the IC.